Recent studies have shown that there is a skills deficit in the cybersecurity sector in South Africa. In an effort to help address this, the Regent, a business school, hosted a webinar to educate company executives more about cybersecurity. To tell us more about this, I'm joined now by the head of Regent's Commerce and Management School, Dr. Shahiem Patel, who joins us virtually from here in Johannesburg. Dr. Patel, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. You know, we're seeing this kind of call being put out in the public space, and especially the business space, all the time. Pay attention to cybersecurity. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough women. We don't even have enough people of color, black people, in cybersecurity. So the gaps are wide, and it's a really, really large space. And it's also a space that you need to come to terms with on an ongoing basis. You can't just say, I've taken care of my cybersecurity, we'll talk about it again in a year's time. Why did a Regent Business School feel it was important to hold a webinar of this kind? Because I understand the invite would have gone out to your alumni, and you would think that those are the types of stakeholders and business leaders that would know that cybersecurity is important.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I think you've really set the tone for a decent enough conversation for us to delve into just how prevalent the threat of cybersecurity is in South Africa and beyond today. And I think you raised the point about the alumni who all else equal would be the sophisticated users of IT technology and the like. And they would be the most aware that the risk of cybersecurity is at its prime, especially with regards to new technologies that are coming out almost on a daily basis, especially in the field of AI. And so we thought that, you know, we need to, number one, test whether or not that skill level is at the appropriate mark within our student population as well as our alumni. And then number two, wherever the gaps are, and we knew there would be gaps because, like you say, it's a moving set of targets all the time. So trying to find the right interventions and appropriate sort of educational interventions that would address those gaps. And I suppose that was really the high-level thinking around why we had this particular webinar. And it will more than likely be a series of webinars that continues throughout the year and perhaps becomes a feature of our calendar throughout the academic year.
And what is the feedback that you've received? I would imagine that a big corporate business, for instance, would have a different need in terms of cybersecurity as opposed to a small and medium enterprise who perhaps doesn't have that much cash to throw around to ensure that their cybersecurity is up to speed. What are you hearing from this space?
Sure, and I think, you know, you're right. There's a disparity between the needs in the industry, both from a professional perspective as well as from an end user perspective. And certainly the initial feedback, certainly from our students, was that actually, you know what, I wasn't aware that this was a risk. I wasn't understanding that this kind of behavior may lead to some unintended consequences in my personal as well as my professional capacity. And so that was one big alarming outtake that students shared. I think when we look beyond our student population and we look at some of our other stakeholders that attended the session, I think the feedback was more around, you know what, this is actually useful not just for students, not just for alumni, but even for professionals themselves. Because I think as professionals, sometimes you become so immersed, you're so close to the situation that you become somewhat blinded to the most basic and obvious threats that are around. And so it's a healthy reminder that for everybody, irrespective of how closely connected you are to cybersecurity, you do have a role to play, and it's very, very valuable for you to keep on having these reminders and hearing it sometimes from an external source, just telling you a little bit more about what you regard to as your own home is very, very powerful in driving that message across that cybersecurity remains a threat in today's time.
Do you think that there's enough of an understanding that the time of the lone IT guy who goes from desk to desk to set up your profile and set up your email and ensure you've got a different password, that time has indeed passed, and that cybersecurity is not a nice to have, it's something that has to be invested in, but at the same time, do we have enough specialists out there that can be hired for this important job?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, let's just break it down into its constituent parts when we talk about cybersecurity. As the name suggests, it has lots to do with digital, it has lots to do with technology, typically with some kind of a device, some kind of software sitting behind it. And the logical response would be that there are softwares that respond to cybersecurity threats, to malware and ransomware threats and so forth. But I suppose the driving message that came out of our session was that you cannot replace the communication that goes along or that sits beneath the use of technology to respond to these threats. And so that example that you used around somebody literally standing over your shoulder or sitting in your chair at work, doing some kind of an update on your machine, it has its place, because sometimes you as the user may think I'm doing something and there's a series of risks associated with that seemingly innocent set of actions. And so that technology, that software that sits sort of as the first line of defense, is supported with somebody who can just tell you, whisper in your ear and say, just be careful. We've seen a lot of other people and another team, another organization has suffered with a particular risk or cybersecurity threat based on a similar behavior that you are about to embark on. And that becomes sort of on-the-job training. And it speaks to a more broader skills shortage that we spoke about briefly, where on the part of the professionals as well as the end users. And so that end user piece is now helpful in those little conversations at one's desk, trying to make sure that the small little basics are being looked after from a cybersecurity threat perspective.
A very important conversation that we need to continue to have. That's Dr. Shahiem Patel. He's the head of the Commerce and Management School at Regent Business School. We thank him for his time this afternoon.